It's they say you're under my power, that's it. Now that I thought about it, that's why I knew a guy that he put together this act. He was singing small clubs back in the 60s, trying to be a hypnotist, and that was it. I never could put my finger on it. He never did get really going good, but he would look at people and say, and now you are under my car, you're under my car. He even talked to me. We both said, yeah, it's close, but... Are we on? All right, here we go. Some continuations, believe it or not, before we get, if I can tonight, to another part of the myth that you were making up for us, having to do with methods on this legendary planet that had the mythical kind of, what'd you call it, a church, religion, that was called. You may take it as an attitude that it's actually pretty simple. Connected with that, and something else we were talking about, the need in the secondary world, about secondary stuff and affairs, to speak things specifically. You recall we've been through this, taking the processes of being alive, turning them into the proper kind of food, the proper kind of energy packets for the intellect that is episodic, that is discrete, that is measurable, that are, as you want to call them, things specific. And of course, what I was trying to push last time a little more is not only to discuss things in the secondary world, but in very specific detail and in quantity. Now, if you looked at it from the other kind of view that we were imposing verbally, that I was calling a plain think, if you looked at it from that kind of view, there is something very specific that you should be able to find of some interest having to do with your fingertips, the world out there, and the world in here, and that is in the secondary world, and that world which is now inescapable. In the secondary world, you could say that the further something is, relatively speaking, which is the only way that you can describe the secondary world, that relatively speaking, the further something is from primary concerns, the more it must be talked about. As always, some of you may find a chuckle or two, which don't consider it to be a joke just because it's funny. That much of what goes on in life, much of what could be open to social comment, criticism, observation, general wiseacring, has an unrecognized background of energy that is not being, for those that have an exceptional subversive appetite, the kind of hunger that does not get fed by ordinary information. So consider the less that something is primary based, the more, and conversely, the more intertwined it is, the more necessary it has become for secondary world purposes, the greater becomes the kind of detailing, the kind of parallel, connected thought that must go along. And several examples come to your mind. Well, they came to somebody's mind, and I'll go ahead and... Now, before I get to the examples, consider, it might be worthwhile, consider that in the secondary world, and still we're having to speak relatively, which, of course, you and I both despise. But consider, because all of this is simply a way, it is a kind of staining, an intellectual staining process to make an unrecognized aspect of the background that is necessary for the ordinary intellect to operate, to make unrecognized aspects stand out, is the only reason that this kind of conversation can be of any particular revolutionist value. That a little more specifically along this line is this, that in the secondary world, and we could use very easily, which I think you'll see, ordinary secondary world citizens' observations. Quite sophisticated, run-of-the-mill, social observers, commentators in the secondary world, the kinds of things that they would be inclined, some segment of them would be inclined to say were, relatively speaking, fairly unsubstantial activities in the city. They are the ones, those kind of activities, those kinds of affairs, those kinds of concerns are the ones that require the most commentary. They require the most, I was inclined to say, since I've already said it, a kind of parallel thought. But that brings up an interesting side path. The changes that appear to be expansion and appear to be growth in the secondary sense cannot operate in the same way that primary changes could occur, leave us say that they were occurring in one person's lifetime. Let us say that on the primary level that men were beginning to grow for the sake of having to deal with electronic technology. Let us say that men are beginning to develop, and did so within one lifetime, another eye. And don't look for metaphors, another EYE. It would require no commentary. Now, not that someone wouldn't probably speak up and say, do you realize you've got a third eye in your forehead? So it might be noted, but it requires no running. It requires no parallel commentary. It requires no extensive talk about what has happened. Men are getting taller, stronger. Things that would be of to arbitrarily and relatively speaking, to divide again the primary from the secondary. If there were changes happening in one's lifetime, which would be very abrupt and would be tantamount to instantaneous, it would require no commentary. Conversely, in the secondary world, the changes, that which appears to be progress, and we're not questioning it because in the secondary world it is, but all changes, the introduction of that which seems to be new, the revisions, the rewrites of secondary ideas and activities, require what amounts to a kind of parallel commentary. May I suggest that not only could this be found operationally interesting, there is a core within that. It is not a commentary that is parallel. It is not a series of comments and talk that is connected to the change. They are, in fact, you got to put it in little finger things, they are, in fact, one. Except to ordinary secondary intelligence, this cannot be correct. Because something that is happening and a comment are two separate things. Now, even I know that ordinary intelligence would say that. That is sequentially correct. That is a form of city reality. But the operational definition, the operational reality is that these changes in the secondary world, the changes in the secondary world of you, the changes in the ordinary secondary mentation of man, are inseparable from comments about it. One does not precede the other, although to ordinary intelligence, of course, it must run sequentially. And you would say, wait a minute, it's a new kind of music. But as soon as I heard that music, as soon as I realized that what that is retro Hindu heavy metal. Like I knew it. As soon as I heard it, I went, that's some form. They are just simply trying to take erstwhile Hindu heavy metal music and they're trying to redo it. They don't fool me. So, as must be correct with ordinary intelligence, there is temporal sequence. But from a more complex view, if you were dealing with revolution, if you were dealing with new intelligence from a different place that was not limited to the four dimensions of the city, it's not sequential. For anybody that is sleepy enough to think that this is paradoxical, if you heard the new music, and I'm using you as humanity, some segment or all of humanity, If you heard a new music, if you heard a new idea, and there was no comment, what would seem to be a parallel commentary, can you hear just for a second that it would not exist? We're not going to play some kind of pseudo 1960 San Francisco Zen games and say, well, if the music was played and nobody had a name for it, does that fall into the same hit parade list as one hand clapping? It's not quite that simple, other than the fact that it's even more simple. You cannot have one without the other in the secondary world. The commentary is as much the reality of what would appear to be the change as the change itself. Now, I guess some of you by now can take that as being an almost reasonable sentence, but also realize that the ordinary intelligence, it's not that we're right and the rest of life is dumb. All you got to do is look at your own intelligence. That is not the general flow of energy to anyone's intelligence, that a something, a thing, a change, and any comment thereon, related to, pertinent to, that in some way it is the same thing. It's obviously not, because the thing can happen and you can withhold comment. Right? That's your story. If it has become a part, if it is right then being a part of ordinary life, which is now here, it is inseparable. And I do not foresee any great benefit of standing at this bus stop forever. But it is worthwhile to see for yourself that which is absolutely, well, let's be technical, insane to ordinary intelligence, that the comments regarding, the thoughts regarding change in the secondary world are inseparable from the change, which is a form of crude misdirection to start with, because to say that they're inseparable would imply that in some way they were separate at one time, or could be separate, and you just can't do it. They are, in fact, one and the same thing, other than the fact there is no explanation for that to ordinary intelligence. There's no definition, there is no sequential form of logic to make you see that the comments and the change are the same thing. Because they're obviously not, but they are. Whew. All right, how about some examples then? Since everybody likes that. The less substantial things would appear to be in the secondary world, the more it would seem that there is required to be the kind of parallel, the kind of apparent parallel commentary, that they must be talked about even more. How about the world of celebrities, the world of showbiz, the world of famous people, all forms of showbiz, from ministers and rabbis and politicians to singers and dancers and everybody else? The less substantial would appear to be, let us say, the talent, the treasure trove, the background of conquest and awards and recognition. In other words, as I assume all of you know as well as I do, nowadays we have the world of professional famous people. They're people that apparently are just famous for being famous. They're just like professional celebrities. The less substantial would seem to be these people's background, the more they must be talked about. That if you were running your own little talk show, and don't anybody try and take this metaphorically like it was going on in your own head, that kind of stuff would just, I don't know, make you sick at your stomach. The less apparent ability, the less there would appear to be some substantial cache of talent, ability, the more the person must be built up. The greater must be the introduction, for instance. When, as we have already noted, if it is someone in the secondary world at this instant who requires no introduction, they're so famous, then their introduction amounts to, here's a person who requires no introduction. And that's about it. But if you have someone, and you say, and here she is, that world famous celebrity, who was the woman that showed up for years on TV that was famous, nobody knew why, Ruta Linsky or something like that, nobody, the spokesman for, some kind of soap or something. And they had to keep talking about world famous, world famous. The less there would seem to be a substantial basis, even in the secondary world, only in the secondary world, the more the person must be talked up, the more the person must be promoted, the more detailed must be the intro. If they were going to say, let's say that you showed up for whoever you would consider to be very famous, Julio or Sinatra or the Stones or Barry Manilow or somebody, whoever you consider. And so the opening act, you sit down, you paid your money, and they come out and they say, well, Mr. Manilow will be on in approximately 55 minutes. And first, for your listening enjoyment, for your entertainment, is a quite well-known figure, great songwriter, great singer in his own right, all up and down the West Coast, a man that you're going to be hearing more and more of. And the more they do that, you know it's going to be somebody you've never heard of. When they say the more and more, and they keep on. And we're not saying that the person may have no talent. But insofar as you are concerned, insofar as taking the audience's view, it is an unproven product. And whereas, if the star was Mr. X, Manilow, Bette Midler, when it does come time, the opening act's through, they just kind of saying, here she is, a woman who needs no introduction, blah, blah, blah. It must be a great detailing, if assuming that this is going to become some fairly viable part of the secondary world. That is, this opening act is going to prove to have some sort of legs, that this opening act is going to be around for a while, that life needs the kind of energy on some small level, that this opening act is going to be transforming. So to do so, and for it to become famous, there has to be a greater amount of running commentary, of talking it up, promoting it, introducing it. I must admit, we're playing a slippery game because it's going to get worse. I was being magnanimous. Even in areas that would appear to be beyond or separate from the frailties of human nature, that which would appear to be more of a intellectual, creative area. How about books themselves? Now, if a book is a bestseller, and ordinary intelligence, of course, may tie that, and I could run around with that too, into the author itself, his self. That if it was a brand new, whoever's hot, Wallace or Robbins or James Michener, Hemingway, is he back? You might say, well, that doesn't require a great deal of promotion. Well, look at it another way. You've got to listen subtly and quickly. A bestseller, it's already selling good. Big publisher, and you pick up the New York Review of Books or whatever, and it might have a little thing, bubbling under the top 10 bestseller with a bullet, if they did that with books. Michener's new hot book. The larger ads, they get bigger and bigger, are full page. What are they? When they start really getting down to drivel, palaver, it doesn't mean it may not sell eventually. But if you turn to a page and it says, not only the publisher, they've already got 2 or 3 semi-famous authors, half drunk, and got them to make some comment. And it starts out, because it's going to be somebody you never heard of, but it starts out and it says, Ernest Hemingway says, well, they figure how dumb people, got a short memory. They don't know he's not. So they say, Ernest Hemingway says, America's greatest author since James Joyce. See? Well, when you're dead, you lose track of stuff like this, Anyway, don't pick, the man's dead. Yeah. I don't know why we always have to stoop low enough for a joke. It will push, it will start out with somebody you know. Be some well-known reviewer, some other author will say, the most important first new novel of the decade. Now, none of this, as all of you know, if you have your wits with you, if you brought them. It's not criticism, nothing's wrong, it's not foolish, it's not some sort of intellectual conspiracy, but a new product, a new author, an unknown work. From the secondary view of the world, it is less substantial than that which is already a bestseller, or that which is already pre-sold, such as a new Harold Robbins, or a new James Michener, or a new Stephen King, that you just will assume, if you're interested in such things, that they all got to do is put a little ad, Stephen King's new novel, or the publisher can, it's the same thing, take a whole page, and all it says, and it's blank, except in the center it says, Stephen King has a new novel. And if you say, when you like stuff like that, you go, where? What's the name of it? You call up a bookstore. But if it's not a bestseller, if it's an unknown quantity, if it is new, then the secondary world, the running commentary, has got to increase. It has got to become more detailed, and I don't really say this in a pejorative sense, although the words themselves are, but it has to get down to the level of just being prattle and drivel and just yammering. They have got to drag in outside sources, they've got to drag in other authors, they've got to drag in reviewers, and of course, they get additional problems. The even less substantial it is, then you look up and it starts out, instead of it being a quote from some well-known New York literary critic, it'll say something like, America's most important new novelist this decade, and you look down at somebody named, Fred Shoemake from the Omaha Herald-Gazette. That's the best they could do. But even that was better than they just say, important new novel by Joe Blow. We're not speaking of some sort of literary quality. Secondary sense is all irrelevant. I'm speaking of the flow of energy that makes the apparent changes in the secondary world observably tied to a running commentary. Well, let's slip a little more. When it gets into just advertising itself, the newer the product, or from even a secondary view, the more questionable, the more potentially questionable might be its usefulness. The more vigorous, the more verbally enthusiastic must be the ads. Now this, you can cover everything from major home appliances to books, to celebrities. There is a prime example that some of you have lived through. I was going to use television, but some of you are too young. We can take the reproduction of music. I was going to point out to you that some of you are old enough to remember when television sets had to be advertised, had to be promoted. In the late 50s when TV came out, and we can do this with sound reproduction with stereos, but they actually had to sell televisions, like you need a television. And they'd show pictures of families over here, and one family sitting around a little television set, and all the children, everybody's smiling, and then next to it was this family sitting around with no television in their home, and they're all looking like they were about to, commit mayhem on each other. And it was trying to tell you why you need a TV. And nowadays, you don't really see advertising say you need a TV, but there's this kind of graduation between the primary and the secondary world. In other words, some of you are old enough, and if TV sounds a little strange, Some of you grew up when they were still having to really try and sell that you need a stereo. And they were showing ads in Rolling Stone and younger publications. Again, it would be like somebody sitting around the dormitory at school. Some guy looked like a nerd. And obviously, you don't see anything on the shelf. Oh, it's something, useless like books or some crap. And he's looking like, and his little caption says, Saturday night. And there he sits. And next to it is another guy sitting at a dorm, Saturday night, and he has a stereo playing. And there are women all around, belly dancers, and they're clowns. They had to sell the fact that you need a stereo. It's now reached the point, notice, there are no ads. Nobody's pushing the fact that you need a stereo because now it's like television. I think television's in something like 95% of the homes in America. Now, I assume that now it's some fairly decent stereo. It's not that big a percentage, I'm sure. But if you'll notice, the ads don't really push that you need a stereo. The point being, do you see that there was a time that some of you can remember that television, when it was brand new, when you just never even seen a picture on a box being sent through the air. They had to sell the fact. They had to promote that you need a television. You need a box that picks up pictures. It was then substantially irrelevant to even the secondary world. In other words, it didn't exist. It was just one day, as far as the people knew, you picked up a newspaper or you turned your radio to listen to the news, and they said RCA or Motorola, who it was, has announced that they're going to start producing television sets, which are to the eye as the radio is the ear. And people went, what the hell does that mean? Well, people were dumber when all they had was radio. They had to sell television. But now the graduation is such, the point being, that they do not have to sell television like you need a television set. The advertising now for television are the features of a television. But the ad is in no way aimed at, hey, do you have a TV? You need a TV. What was once, let us say, an option in the secondary world, a television. They got along, that, as most people in the ordinary world would say, for at least 6,000 years like television. The secondary world progressed right along without television. But the point is now, at least in our part of the world, and almost the rest of the world, now television is almost, just damn near almost, a secondary necessity. It's why they do not have to promote it. They're trying to sell you a different TV, a new television, but the ads are for features. The ads have nothing to do, it is like a fait accompli that you got a TV. Or if you don't, you desperately want one. I mean, I don't know what happened. They repossessed yours. But it is an accepted fact in the secondary world that everybody either has a television set, or by God, you want one so bad you could almost, right? So the graduation has gone from it being even in the secondary sense, and it was certainly not a primary necessity. And there was a time, as late as the 50s, late 50s, when it was not even a secondary necessity. But now notice, if there were such things as primary affairs in the secondary world, if you're following this, now such things that at one time, just 3 decades ago, were an option. In other words, they were new, and nobody had to have them to be a reliable secondary citizen. But now, it is almost a necessity, just damn near almost, that you have a television. And so they no longer have to promote it. Not the set. It is now the fine-tuning, the little features, a new cabinet, bigger screen, smaller screen, triangular screen. But the deed has been done. It is now a necessity in a secondary sense, but I want you to see that there is this continuing graduation. It is the change going on and on for years. Men had to tie their clothes on. And then somebody thought up the button. And it took another 50 years, and somebody thought, you know what we need is a hole in your clothes for that button to go through. So then they had the button. And I'm sure when it first came out, there were people, if they had advertising then, that somebody picked up the, the Venice throwaway sheet, and it says, so-and-so has invented a new thing. It's known as a button. They had an ad there that, you need a button. That was showing a family sitting around their little house there, and some of them looked real sad because they had no buttons, and next to it was a little drawing of all these little kids, and everybody had buttons on their clothes. Then a little while later, the button hole, and then it got even worse. That is, you had to have it even more so. The point is, it is this continuing expansion. And that which at one time, even in a lifetime, is getting so fast now, such as television and certain kinds of musical reproduction systems. I assume I guess nowadays, the next generation are going to be, well, they won't even have to laugh. I started to say it, turntables and analog records, because they're just about to go away. You got to have a CD. It's happening now in a lifetime that which, even in your lifetime, could be seen as an option. Well, maybe I'll get a TV, maybe I won't. Or maybe I'll get a CD player. I like music, maybe I'll get one. But what's the hurry? They just came out. And then in your lifetime, you may suddenly find that you got to have a CD player. Your friends come over, a girlfriend, and you suddenly, you picture you as being one of those pictures of somebody who's not with it. That people come over to your house, or you just suddenly imagine, you foresee it. You called a party, and it just strikes you, they're going to come over, and people are going to say, where's your CD collection? And all you got is a bunch of records and a turntable. It is now a necessity. It is a primary necessity. I was now going to ask to the slippery part, which is what makes sometimes this interesting, that the slipperiness is not going downhill. The trick is you get slippery, but you got to go uphill. And the slipperiness is this. After all of that, professional celebrities, people being famous for no particular reason other than they're talked up a lot, to books being bestsellers, that which seems to be substantial requiring the least comment, and that which would appear to be, even in the relativist secondary sense, appear to be the less substantial, has got to be talked about the most. And from that which at one time, even in a lifetime, could appear to be a secondary option, becomes very quickly a secondary world necessity. All of that. Could you see any possibility of turning that inward to your own nervous system, right here? And consider what the ordinary intellect normally thinks in things specific. And then consider that which the intellect and everybody has that is of the least substantial value is that which everybody talks up the most. It's not psychological. It's not some flaw. It is the basis of the free enterprise system in the electronic marketplace. And I'm not talking about TVs now. I should be more specific. The electrical marketplace. That which is of the least immediate value, that which is the least substantial, is that which is talked up the most. Nobody likes that. A real subversive, of course he wouldn't like it. He just, because, those of you who need any more becauses, is then considering all your life, you might have enjoyed reading Shakespeare and Hobbes and everyone else, and going around chasing some guru or some new cult of some kind. But notice that which is talked up the most is that from a very subversive way, but it's true with everybody. They just don't notice it. That which is talked up the most by everybody, not by idiots, not by fools, not by conspirators somewhere, by humanity. That which is talked up the most is done so for a very solid economic reason, because it is the least substantial. It has the least talent. It has the least to offer, and therefore it must be talked up. Now, I'm not going to be crude enough to point out to you the kinds of things, specific examples, that humans talk about. The certain institutions of man. The certain, as they're known as the eternal ideas that we discuss. Let's skip discuss. You got a synonym dictionary. It's talked up. Think about the ideas, the notions, the theories, the institutions, the forces, the dreams, the fears. All of them. Think of them your own. I'm not going to give any examples. There is a sense of decency that must finally fall upon us all. But think of your own examples, that the very things that are talked up the most are done so for a reason. Of course, ordinary intelligence will say, well, hey, how about get a brain? They're talked up for a reason because they're so important. Yeah. In the city, that'll fly. Of course, a cheap piece of damn paper. You know how to fold those up. That'll fly. Well, these kinds of things that you're pointing out, if I'm hearing you correctly, I'm doing my imitation of life again. If I'm hearing you correctly, then those kinds of important things that I bet you're talking about that you don't want to say, but those kinds of things that all humanity, history, good conscience, the kinds of things that men talk about, and you questioning, well, they're talking about it for a reason. Are you an idiot? The reason they talk about them, the reason they are commented upon to such an extent, is self-evident. I got you. Because they are so important. Would people talk about stuff that are not important? And of course, there I stand again thinking, what in the hell am I doing? Carrying on a conversation with life at this level. Because that's correct, other than the fact that I'm telling you otherwise. Or telling you the possibility. It's just a story. Of course, it does present a certain problem if you've been listening for the last 30 minutes or so, and you did grasp that there is a very potentially potent, if not pregnant, reality to the fact about advertising, famous people, and all of that, that which is of least substance is that which must be promoted. If I drug all that out too much, we can always get back to the level of really cutting, as is exemplary if you can think in a certain way. As arbitrary and artificial as it is of cutting up everything into the primary and the secondary, you do understand if we could still cut it up and it was operationally valid, which it can be as far as you thinking about it, into primary things, the primary world does not have to be talked up. Primary needs do not have to be talked up, period. Now they may be, but then it becomes a reflection. In other words, nobody has to sell you on the idea of eating. Now they have to sell you on the idea of dining. They have to sell you on the idea of, listen, are you hungry? Come to Big Jim's Steakhouse. No, come over here to Big Edna's Steakhouse. They have to sell that, but not secondary. Nobody has to sell sex. They have to sell love, eroticism, all kinds of secondary manifestations. But no one, even resembling the sane, no one must be sold on the desire. No one must be given a sales pitch. Hey, would you like to? No. Or nobody has to be sold on the idea of, you look like you're about to freeze to death staying out there in the snow. It just came to me, I have a splendid idea, if I may be so bold as to suggest. Why don't you get somewhere where it's, I think they call it more clement. Warmer. Why don't you get somewhere warmer? The guy standing there freezing goes, I don't know. Come on. Wait a minute. Think about it. People who are warmer are happier. And you pull out, you got this little drawing of this family that's real cold. And they're standing out in the snow and they look real sullen. And then you got a picture of people who are inside a cave and they look warmer and they look much more intelligent. They're happier. Their IQ went up. And the guy's saying, well, I still don't know. You understand. But there is validity to that. The more substantial, the closer it is rooted, because it's all rooted there, but the closer it is rooted to primary affairs, primary concerns, the less. And if we could go back that far, less is not even the word, there'd be none. But you understand, the less it has to be sold. The less it has to be talked about. There is no need if we were back at a primary level. There would be no corollary need, no coeval necessity for a commentary of any kind. But the more you get in the secondary world, which you must, you're born there. There's nothing wrong with it. But the more you are in the secondary world, the further removed you are from the primary basis, the more of what you do, what you think, must be talked up. There must be commentary. And I remind you again, if you can see it, this is all a kind of subterfuge because it is not a comment on it, it's the same thing. Well, I'm going ahead. Or maybe I shouldn't. I was going to extend the story and get it into very specific 2 methods that you had never thought about. And it's tied to this, but I'm sure you would hate me. You have to stop in the middle of it. Let me pick up a piece of something else to mention. The last few times when we were talking about, you recall, enthusiasm, and I pointed out that in the secondary world, it's not a person's neighbor's exotic, strange ideas, philosophies, religion, politics that are frightening. It's initially his enthusiasm. And we went through enough examples that if you're ever going to see it, you're going to see it. Could you then see any possible internal use of that regarding trying to introduce new, and we'll have to say very strange ideas to your otherwise already established and hence conservative repertoire? Can you take this and bring in neighbors' ideas that are foreign, strange to say the least, exotic, and originally, as it should, are frightening? They simply are, because every time you bring somebody new into the party in the closet, every time you bring in somebody new, you just never notice, you're having to bid adieu to an old friend. You may not notice it, but to bring in new information, to bring in somebody new at the party's already filled, folks. The closet, your closet, is jam up if you're going to stay where you are. And so for something new to come in, somebody's got to leave. Somebody got to get out of your small closet. They're still in the big closet with all of us. But every time you say hello, every time you hear an idea, every time that you accept something of a new quantum little packet of electrical energy here, there's another little discrete package that goes out the back door. It is, of course, not thought about, but there is an awareness of that. It is the clinging to of the conservative nature, to use ordinary terminology, of the conservative nature, the orderly progression of the way life expands in the secondary world. It is why, even in political affairs, if you notice, what are normally referred to as the conservatives, the Whigs, the right-wingers, but the conservatives are always, constructively speaking, in the secondary world, in power. If the liberals, if the left wing appears to be, and they can be, in power somewhere, it's just a passing fancy. It is the conservative nature, and don't worry about politics now. Look at you. What seems to keep people stable at the ordinary level? It's your conservative nature intellectually. Sure, I know some of you are young enough that you can write tomorrow and go, well, to hell with all that, and get a mohawk haircut. Or spike your hair, those of us that have any left. Do something. You can go, I'm going to go trade in my Buick and get a Ferrari. If I can find a car like dumb enough. You can say all that, but internally, no. Which, of course, is part of the problem. There's a planet, I was going to make it a Cairo, where they outlawed the term of course. But of course, they ignored it. The conservative nature of this, the orderly expansion of the secondary world, is such as the basis of some of the arguments that men have about themselves that, well, what the hell? I left my wife. After all these years, I finally, I got a hair transplant. I got some hair, transplanted in my chest, or I got this little hair piece that you can stick on. Got me some hip clothes, they still say hip. And I went out, and I even attracted a few young girls. I'm sure they were laughing at the jokes I told. I'm sure that's what they were laughing at. At any rate, I did all that, took them home in my Ferrari, and yet, you know what? Damn, I still don't feel that much different. Oh, well, give me another snort. Give me another drink. I'll be all right. It is the conservative nature of life at this level. It is the conservative nature of the intellect. When it comes time to actually try and introduce what would amount to new works, not just rewrites, that's bad enough, or revisions, that can be strong enough, but to try and introduce absolutely whole new chapters, whole new pieces of art into one's intellect, if you are simply living at the old address, at the old neural building site, pardon my hyperbole, but it's extremely difficult. Notice, you can go, well, wait a minute, and you can take a pen. I want to write this down. It's extremely difficult. That means operational definition. Did having to go extremely difficult? I will remember that and think about it. There it is. It's extremely difficult. Well, wait a minute. I will write it down because I've never heard anyone say that to think something new or to take in new information means something old's got to go, and therefore even if people don't think about it, it's, what'd you say? I say extremely difficult. I was being sort of, in a non-aggressive or hostile manner, I was being sort of sarcastic, if there was a term for that with no aggression in it. And I said, yeah, it's rather difficult. Well, that's what I want to do. I want to write that down because I never thought about that. Okay. Do you not hear? There it is. Okay, let's assume you never thought about it. And let's assume it has some validity and somebody said it that knew what they were talking about. That helps a little. In the city, it helps a little. And so you heard it and it's something new. And it says, it's extreme. It's rather difficult to take in new information. Wait a minute. Let me write that down. That's it. No, I won't write it down because I want to think about it. In other words, you're going to write down that it's extremely difficult to take in new ideas. Well, I never thought about that. That's a new idea to me. I won't write it down. Now, have you completely lost where I picked up the continuation having to do with the fact that people believe that they are frightened. And in the secondary world, it's true. It's not that they're mistaken. That they are frightened, and they would say many, many times with good cause, at their neighbors differing, and then, fill in your own blanks. Political system, political theories. It can be an actual whole neighboring other country or city, or it can just be your neighbor next door. Somebody out here in the street in your own local vicinity saying, Marx lives. Let's become communist now that it's falling apart in other parts of the world. You can go, well, wait a minute, that's dangerous, huh? I don't have any truck with that kind of stuff. It is not the danger. It is not some actual fear of other ideas. Now, of course, the ideas have to be foreign to you. That is, it's not part of your everyday, of the running through your AC lines here. It is not the intrinsic nature, if there was one, of the ideas of a religion, of a philosophy, political, economic, social. It's not that. It's the enthusiasm. And I know it makes no sense, but some of you caught it last time when I pulled out the example that if they're political ideas or if they're religious ideas, that they're going to worship the toenail clippings of Hubert Humphrey III if they could get him to send them down. If that was their political, or if that was their new religion, and assuming that they, which again, if they even went that far, would assume, but let's go ahead and say, they do so with not a great deal of gusto. No particular enthusiasm. That's just, you ask them, they say, yeah, that's our religion. You would have no fear. The neighbors would have no fear See? You're faced with it. Of course, then ordinary intelligence can look off and go, well, that's some more of that verbal trickery. It's not some indigenous content of your neighbor's ideas, the foreign ideas, new ideas. It's the enthusiasm. The enthusiasm that seems to be inherent in your neighbor, your dangerous neighbor. Did you ever think about this? It is what would amount to the sea flow in life itself. It is the running edge of the wave of change going through life. That's what enthusiasm is. Man didn't invent enthusiasm. People don't sit around and decide, well, I've been a Presbyterian now 30 some odd years, and by God, it's about time I got enthusiastic about it. Right? I've been a Democrat all these many years. Sometimes I vote and sometimes I don't, but by God, I'm going to change. I'm going to convert and become a Methodist. I'm going to become an independent. Men do not sit around, as you know this, and decide I'm going to be enthusiastic. It is simply a descriptive term with a certain flow of energy. But it is always, now it may die out, everything finally comes to a conclusion from ordinary observation. But it is the beginning, it is the running edge of change. And that's what is frightening. But it gets down to a local level of one group saying, well, I fear my neighbor. I fear the whole neighboring country, or I just fear the new ideas, some people moved in next door. Well, why do you look so concerned? I mean, are they green? They got 4 eyes or fangs? Well, no, they look all right. But something's wrong. I heard them talking. What is frightening? Now, if they just move in and they're real quiet, you don't want to hear anything, and you go peek in and there's a little altar, and you look, in some way, in your great intellectual capacities, you're able to divine that there on the altar are the toenail clippings of Hubert Humphrey III. And the people are just sitting around, they're not doing anything, but it's just over there. And you go, that may be grounds for some concern on my part. I better keep an eye on this closely. And you never hear a word about it. They're quiet. They come and go. They go to work. And nothing's ever said. And if later I said, you told me one time, blah, blah, blah. Whatever happened to that? I mean, did you people run them out of town? Or did you arm yourself? You told me that you were just sure that they were worshiping somebody's toenails or it was on an altar. Oh, yeah, I did tell you that. Oh, I don't know. Those people are all right. Would you get to know them? Well, not really. But you're real frightened, or you said you were getting concerned. Well, maybe I did. Well, you seem to got over it. Yeah, I guess I did. What happened? There was no enthusiasm. Your toes were not being tickled by the running edge of a wave of change. Now, it could have been. But we'll assume that time did not prove out that the worship of the toenail clippings of Hubert Humphrey III became a major religious force. A new, of course, major religious force, I should add. Consider yourself to take in any new information, to be able to abide it at all. And the initial, may I suggest, usefulness of this is to simply notice, although you very likely will have never used such terms in your observation, but there is a kind of fright. Now, you could say otherwise regarding new ideas, because you can say that you've been trying to fool around with this kind of stuff for the very purpose of getting new ideas. But if that be true, and if you found a place that said new ideas here, new strange ideas, and you were convinced, or you thought, well, it sounds right. I like the smell of the place. I like the cut of their jibs and their giblets. So I'll try it. So let's assume that there's all kinds of new information coming out of this place where you go, this institution, this building somewhere. This is perfectly possible and correct by three-dimensional descriptions, that the information's coming out. It's being broadcast. And I ask you, well, how's it going? Well, I don't know. I go and sometimes it seems to make a little sense, sometimes it doesn't. What's going on? I repeat, you would have never used these terms perhaps. But there is a built-in conservative rejection, even if you say what I want are new ideas, because to take them in is going to be pulling at the cuffs of a Jesse Helms, of an Attila, of you. Because the nature of the party, even if your party is saying, we want new ideas, it is the basis, without knowing it verbally, and it's not psychological, it is physical, that somebody has got to be dismissed. Some of the old energy is going out of your system. There is built in, without any need for a commentary, any need for any verbal awareness on your part, anybody's part. That is part of the orderly nature of life expanding, is people, even if they try, are tied into a rejection of new electrical energy, new ideas. You remember where we started this 10-minute conclusion? The unrecognized fact that people do not fear their neighbors' exotic, different religion, ideas. They fear their enthusiasm, therefore. You don't see any possible use to take all of that, I fear to say, and use it in the privacy of your own brain. And consider that it's you and your neighbors, the only ones that are of any consequence, reside in the neural areas, the operational areas of your own frontal lobes, and that you're trying to get new information. And then what frightens you about what appears to be new information? You don't see any possible use for that. You don't see any way that you might trick yourself. Running out of time, so I had to say trick yourself. If you're smart enough to trick yourself, if you knew how to do that, the point is you don't have to trick yourself. But we sure don't want to get into that. Well, yeah, we can, since we only have 30 seconds left. Now is the time to get into that. I guess we will conclude it by me pointing out, having you reiterate, let the chorus join in as we fade out and roll the credits, that enthusiasm is an electrical running edge of the wave of change, whether it be widespread, whether it be just in you. And yet, it's enthusiasm in the secondary world, in the mechanical sense, that frightens ordinary intelligence. Thus, I ask you for the third and final time, what could you possibly make of that in the context of an individual use? And I did hear a chorus out in the city, not the one here, and it seems to be wafting in over the evening breeze that hollers, "We're not sure." Keep practicing.